Relevant worship experience is extremely important. A third say church is boring. I would have thought that statistic was much higher. It's probably a lot higher for my generation, but we go anyway, you know. It's just one of those things that, though they have short attention spans, they don't track in the same way. They're certainly not going to learn by being lectured to. They're oftentimes learning in very different ways, very visual learners, multitaskers. I don't know if you have millennials, you know that they sit down to do their homework and they've got to have the radio or the TV on. I could never do that. I had to find quiet. I had to find someplace where I could concentrate because I couldn't multitask. This group, for some reason, they've either learned to do it or not learned to do it. I don't know if they're really learning or not. Sometimes I wonder, but that's the way they do it. So I can lecture to them all I can, but it's not going to change the fact that that is the way that they do it. That's what they're used to. That's part of the norm for them. So the kinds of spaces that use different visual methods are very important. And that's a scary thing for a traditional church because it's scary on a number of levels. Number one, the buildings aren't very suited for that sort of thing. And number two, it used to be really, really expensive. It's not so expensive anymore. You can do things at a very high quality level with not so much money being spent. So, you know, using good technical advantages to be able to communicate information is very, very important. This is that large church in Longwood, Florida that I was showing you before, 3,500 seats. They use the splayed walls as screens. So if the pastor's talking about the cedars of Lebanon, he's standing in a forest all the way across. And it's, again, not that expensive. You can see the graphics used on the splayed walls. This is a church that was still under construction. They were testing out the AV systems, but again, they figured out how to use large open spaces and create environments on those large open blank walls on the sides. So they'll create textures and patterns using lighting, even when they're not trying to communicate information. They're creating mood. They're creating environment. They're using those kinds of things. Predominant use of graphics in these buildings. You know, certainly the worship experience, the sound. You know, I say all the time that when we get done with a building, if we haven't solved the basic issues in the worship space, if we haven't attenuated the noise from the HVAC systems, if we haven't solved the way that sound bounces around the room, it really doesn't matter much else. If we can't solve the basic issues. I was at a church this past 3 days doing a design charrette down in Quincy, Illinois, and a woman last night raised her hand and said, well, what is it that you have for the older people in this solution? And I said, the basics. You can see, you can hear, you can move around. It's accessible, you can get around. The bathrooms are clean, the spaces are clean, the doors work, the hardware works. The parking lot is a great parking lot. It's not all over the place. There's not potholes all over the place. The basics. And she said, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Because that's what we struggle with. We don't have the basics here. I can never hear in this church. I can never tell what's going on. All she wanted was the basics. You can see the church here too. One of the things we talk about too that's very important in church design is getting as many people as we can within that intimate circle, that 64-foot circle where you can read my facial features and I can read you. I can lock eyes with you and understand, are you hearing me or not? Or I can see a little head nod to say I'm connecting with somebody. Those kinds of things are very important to people who are leading worship, who are leading delivery of the word. Get as many as you can. You'll go into this auditorium when we do the tour here in just a little bit, and you'll see out of the close to 2,000 seats in this building, I think there's about 1,900 seats or 1,800 some odd seats, 1,040 of them are well within that 64-foot dimension of where Pastor Troy delivers the word from or whether they deliver worship from. Very important to try to do that. So for the most part, you're seeing rooms that have a wider aspect, communal style worship compared to liturgical style worship. We've done a lot of buildings, conversions of buildings, where we've gone into existing buildings that are wonderful rooms. They're great rooms. I'd love to have my daughter get married in that room. She couldn't get married in our room because we worship in a gymnasium. But those kinds of rooms are wonderful for ceremonial events, but for the delivery of the everyday type stuff that happens in a worship situation, they're just terrible spaces because there's not good eye contact with a half of the people in the room. You have a 400-seat room, and half of them are beyond that 64-foot dimension. Very important to attend to that. And you'll see that as you go into the space. Strong focus. One of the things that Mike did in this is the stage staff here actually created these little squares that you see up there. I didn't even notice when I went in. Are the squares still there? Did anybody see those, Mike? They're not there? Well, for a period of time, what they did is they created these little plexiglass squares, and they put little LED lights behind them, lights that you can turn the dial and change the colors. Again, that idea of creating changing environment, very important to this millennial mindset. Now, mind you, this is a church that is very intentional about going after the younger person. At the time that we were doing this project, I think there were about 2,400 people going to church here, and I think 800 of them were college students showing up at any given time. And what happens in churches like that is those kids come, they form relationships, they marry, they have families, they move forward in the church that's relevant to them. And that is happening here. That has happened in Ames. Again, wide aspects, good focal points, good use of technology, good lighting, all those things are very, very important. Comfortable seating. If you don't solve the seating issues, you've lost them. You've got to have something that's comfortable. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a fixed seat like this. It can be a padded, movable seat. Those things are important too. You see the way the clouds are laid out in this space to be able to reflect sound properly so that the sound is solved properly in a space like that. Good focal point, good use of lighting. If you're going to create flexible space, if you're going to create the kind of room that you can play basketball in or you can have a meal in, you've got to solve the lighting issue. And there's basically 3 good forms of lighting you better consider. The house lights, are they dimmable? Do they go up? Do they go down? If I'm going to share a meal with somebody, I need to be able to see them. I just can't sit in a dark room like this. I've got to be able to see what's going on. If I'm playing basketball, I've got to have a much higher level of light. But I also need to be able to turn those down and have good punctuated light that goes towards the stage. So lighting is a crucially important element to creating good design in spaces like this. Even in simple spaces, just good focus, good use of technology all the way through there. I'll skip through this. One of the things that we oftentimes find ourselves stumbling around is the way that BGW has grown is, it was started by architects who, in Dan's case, who was a contractor, who allied themselves with contractors. We have 25 general contractors around the nation, including Mike's group, Story Construction, who get it, who understand who we are, who work with us in a way that is consistent with the way that we forge relationships with individuals through the course of the project. But one of the areas that we struggle with, besides like fundraising came about for us, Forward in Faith came to us because, or we came to them, is because so many times as architects we got involved in these projects and we saw a non-stewardship manner being applied towards fundraising, which you would think would be an absolute for fundraising. Contracts being set up totally the wrong way. I worked on a project one time where the fundraiser set up an office in the church for 2.5 years, and it was 3 times the size of the pastor's office. He basically commandeered a classroom, outfitted it with all new wall finishes. You could tell that when he was in there for the very first week. This is going to take some time, isn't it? You're investing some money into this room. And he went into this room. He spent 2.5 years on the site asking foundations, setting up appointments. I'm not sure everything that happened in there, but all kinds of meetings were set up over the course of the 2.5 years, and then took half the money from the church to be able to run his expenses for raising the money. It was absolutely absurd. Depleted the church budget. It was a non-stewardship approach towards fundraising. So we brought in Forward in Faith because we were looking for a stewardship approach. The same thing happens on the technical side. You guys can work with any technical group you want to. It doesn't really matter to me, except if they're not operating in a stewardship manner, I feel like we need to talk. If they're not working in a stewardship way, and oftentimes the culture in these communities is they will test you to see where your points are on price. If they can get $1 million for a system that's a $500,000 system, or if they can get $500,000 for a $200,000 system, it is common and predominant in this industry. And the other problem in this industry is oftentimes coming from the acoustical arena. I worked with some of the most internationally famous acoustical designers. David Klepper out of New York, Roger Nappi out of Los Angeles, the Paoletti group out of San Francisco. These were top-notch groups that came in and absolutely devastated my budgets. They would come in as authoritarians that came in and just did some incredible things. We have to solve the acoustical problems. That's not the argument that I'm making, but we can do it in a stewardship-driven way. When it comes to tech, when it comes to financial, that is absolutely crucial for us to agree on that. We need to make sure that we are consistent in all the different disciplines that we're approaching. And if you want to use your own group, great. Let's have the hard conversation, though. How are you attending to stewardship? How is that happening here? What are we doing? So we'll offer this as an option to you. We've had this group come in, though, and save our bacon on many, many projects in the past, so